All right, everyone, it's propaganda alert time. You are being propagandized to with another AstroTurf term, Churchillian, right now. Zelensky, going before Congress, giving Nancy Pelosi a signed Ukrainian flag that supposedly was actually carried in battle. Maybe, maybe not. It's kind of cool, I guess. It's a relic of bloodshed, and, Americans really like that now, don't they? People have turned into war pigs, especially the liberals, and they're being taken in hook, line, and sinker by this comparison between Zelensky and Churchill. This is propaganda, to be clear. You can sympathize with the Ukrainian people and condemn the concept of Russia randomly invading them on diplomatic pretenses that didn't really require invasion. You can have a non-one-sided view of the Russian state. While I'm not a fan of Putin, he is an authoritarian, and he doesn't like mean memes. He's rather thin-skinned, much like Western leaders. Should fit right in the EU, actually. Maybe they should petition to join, say, hey, and I've got basically the same views as you. Just to be clear, I just like fossil fuel more than you people do. While you may be very critical of Putin, he's had rivals assassinated and does crazy shit. That doesn't mean that the average Russian person is like whole-on Vatnik and worships the Russian military and is a tanky. If anything, I think the average mood in Russia is probably pretty close to the opposite right now, silently wishing that the situation were different. I have a feeling this is common among Ukrainians as well. Most people are not warlike, just to be clear. You have a lot more warlike leaders, because psychos tend to run countries, than you do warlike people. Most people, if they get their dick up at all over war stuff, they don't want to actually go onto the front lines. They just want to shitpost on the internet and watch, footage of people getting blown up, and, they pretend that they would be willing to press the trigger and wouldn't live with any guilt because the enemy is one-sided. They are basically animals. Another form of war propaganda. But the big one that I see now, in the wake of Zelensky coming before Congress and meeting with Biden, is that Zelensky is similar to Winston Churchill. Oh, look at this brave liberator. When you compare someone to a historical figure who tends to have been sanitized into a one-sided caricature, Hitler comes to mind, Stalin, Mussolini, the bad guys, Pol Pot or something like that. You're basically like Jeffrey Dahmer because, you like pineapple on your pizza. You're creating a one-sided comparison. The problem is, and this is why it's used for propaganda, when somebody comes out and says, well, the comparison doesn't stick, or, hey, I reject your premise, well then, you must be siding with the other guys. If you deny that Zelensky is basically the new Winston Churchill, it means that you want to side with Hitler, aka Putin. Again, you've created a false dichotomy. You've created overlap where it doesn't really exist artificially because people think in terms of language. So if one person is red, the other person becomes blue because you've created false opposites. Now, in reality, Zelensky is just another corrupt tin horn, just like Vladimir Putin. He's simply one that doesn't have as beefy a military and didn't take the first step of invading a neighbor aggressively. There are years and years of legacy reports comparing Zelensky to Putin, saying, he learned from his mentor quite clearly. It's this problem of the post-Soviet diaspora. All of these countries have the same underlying problem. Zelensky has banned opposition political parties. He's cracked down on Orthodox church services. He's not a great guy. You can think that his nation is blameless in the current situation as much as you want. The fact that he happens to be their chief executive does not mean that by default he's as blameless as the Ukrainian population. Again, it stretches the very concept of reality to make these claims. I would like to point out a couple of material differences, though, between Zelensky and Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill came before Congress as the representative of Great Britain, then the British Empire. A nation which we were directly allied with, to be clear, in the Second World War, in order to get ships, basically, at the time. The Royal Navy had some problems with the fucking U-boats, and so the United States gave a bunch of older class battleships and cruisers and shit to the British. Of course, eventually we get drawn into the war, but that had to do with the Japanese attack. It didn't have to do with German attack, just to be clear. Britain's on the other side of the world. Yeah, they got the presence in India that's getting combated as well at the time, but mainly it's a European country. Operative in the Atlantic theater more than anywhere else at that particular time. The Nazis running through North Africa, of course, didn't help the situation. Churchill also and other Europeans, and Stalin, which is interesting. You might compare Zelensky more to Stalin if you look at the economic situation, was Lend-Lease. The United States single-handedly propped up the Soviets on a lifeline while they were Zerg rushing the German border over and over again and letting millions of their own people die, something that Stalin, as a good communist, thought was a great thing. Well, it'll be way easier to feed people when you have fewer people now, isn't it? Make sure to conscript plenty of those fucking Kamchatkans and Siberian people. Put them on the front line along with the Ukrainians and let the Germans cut them to pieces. Basically a true story of how Stalin operated. What a strategic genius. He killed 2 birds with 1 stone. How many Nazis did we kill today? 5,000. That's pretty good. How many Ukrainians died? 25,000. Oh, even better, says Joseph Stalin. Just to be clear, there is long-standing animus there, even though Stalin was ethnically Georgian, if I remember correctly. Not exactly a Muscovite. Zelensky is not like Churchill, though. He went before Congress to say, give me fucking money. Give me fucking weapons. Give me fucking everything else. It's not a directly allied nation. It's not a nation that functions within the fully westernized sphere politically or socially. Ukraine is one of those Far East European countries, post-Soviet diaspora, with internal corruption issues. If Ukraine is successful in its ventures, as it may very well be, the Russians get war attrition too much, and Putin gets killed, possibly. I don't think that if he doesn't die or something like that, that the war stops anytime soon. Russian reformer takes command and says, look, our people are tired. We can't do this anymore. Let's make some sort of terms. If we can get the Ukrainians to just allow us to annex Crimea and officially announce that it's theirs, we'll withdraw from the rest of Ukraine. Situation goes back to normal. Maybe we build a peace statue on the border or something like that. Let's say that happens. What are you left with? You're left with Zelensky, who is not a fully Europeanized Western-style leader. It's not a democracy. He's suppressing democracy explicitly in his home country. You can say it's for politically pragmatic reasons, while this party that he suppressed wanted to end the war. Okay, you still suppressed a registered political party. That's not democracy, just to be clear. It's tin hornerism. We see that problem in the Western world. We see it in Germany all the time now. They're trying to do the same thing there in their country. I think others are as well. This party's too dangerous for its people to have a voice or a seat at the table. We've got to suppress them. In order to protect free speech, we must destroy people's speech. It's sort of like in order to protect our population against violence, we must disarm them, leaving them open to more violence. You'll notice this is a common theme in dysfunctional states that are having social alienation problems. Zelensky, in the end, assuming they're successful, more or less, depends on the ramifications of a potential peace deal, is left with whack stacks of money and enormous piles of weapons in a country that is war-torn and lacks stability, especially in the eastern half of the country. What do you think is going to happen to the weapons and all the people that were trained? Especially when the government's not capable of paying them their pensions because the government will quickly be abandoned economically by the United States. What happens? Oh, you get a Mujahideen 2.0 situation. So when the next 9/11 happens 10, 15 years later, because a bunch of discredited and forgotten Azov Nazis with a pile of goddamn explosives decide to take a jetliner and ram it into the Eiffel Tower or something like that as a form of crude revenge, who's going to get blamed? It'll just be rogue actors. We had nothing to do with it. It'll be just like with Osama. And then eventually, Zelensky will be hiding in a hole like Osama or Saddam Hussein, maybe in Belarus, maybe in Poland. And we'll kill him, supposedly years later, and we'll forget that, we'll burn the body summarily because there's some sort of custom that's involved that doesn't allow us to show you the dead corpse of Osama or something like that. Of course, very strange times those were as well. And then the war cycle continues. More and more partisans, well-armed, unlike the base population. Maybe they take over the country. You have a counter-revolution. They say, well, we want to get closer to Russia. Maybe they want to join NATO, and then the war cycle starts all over again in the other direction. Who knows what happens, but no, Zelensky is not Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill had his quirks. Overall, in private correspondence, he seems to have given a damn. He was fully westernized. He's fucking British at the height of the British Empire. He's been classically educated. He's not a tracksuit wearing a tin horn like Zelensky is. Again, you can support the Ukrainian people without supporting Zelensky. People are unable to parse this apart in their heads because they've been fooled by fucking propaganda. I see through it. Unfortunately, even when you tell people that's what's happening, half of them get cognitive dissonance. Rather sad. Wonder how the human race has managed to actually invent anything over the course of its existence with such weak, pathetic minds. That's about all. Peace out.